You have witnessed this. Someone is attacked in public. Loud voice, unfair accusation. The entire room turns and waits for him to respond, and he doesn't respond. He doesn't justify. He doesn't explain. Something shifts in his face. It isn't anger. It isn't fear. It's something quieter, something that almost looks like focus. Everyone watching is convinced he just lost. But something is starting to change, and it isn't happening in the room. It's happening inside the head of the person who attacked him. There is a specific kind of man who, at some point in his life, simply stopped defending himself. Not out of cowardice, not out of weakness. Because of a brutal discovery, one that Carl Jung spent decades trying to name, about how power actually moves when nobody is paying attention. And in the next few minutes, you are going to discover 3 things. Why these men stop, what happens inside the head of the person attacking them, and why, after crossing this line, they almost never lose another battle, because they are no longer fighting. And here is where it starts to get unsettling. Defending yourself does not convince the person attacking you. It never has. Think about how counterintuitive that is for a moment. You grew up believing that truth has a kind of gravitational pull, that if you present the facts with enough clarity, with enough calm, with enough argument, the other person will eventually give in. That is a lie. Repeated studies in social psychology show something disturbing. When a person explains their reasoning to someone who has already judged them, the probability that the other person will change their mind does not increase. It decreases. There is a technical name for this. It is called the backfire effect. Every word of defense becomes more material for the attacker to process as confirmation of the verdict they have already reached. He is justifying himself too much. That becomes proof. He is nervous. That becomes proof. He is too calm. That becomes proof. It does not matter what you say. The person decided before you opened your mouth. Your defense only feeds the tribunal. And here is the point that makes most men stop and breathe the first time they understand it. Every time you defend yourself, you do something very specific. Something Jung spent years trying to put into words. You acknowledge the authority of the person who attacked you. Think about that. When you defend yourself in public, you are, without realizing it, accepting 2 premises. The first, that there is a tribunal. The second, that this person has the right to be the judge. And from that instant on, anything you say becomes evidence in a case that should never have been accepted in the first place. Most men spend their entire lives in this position without ever seeing the tribunal. They think they are fighting for the truth. What they are actually doing is outsourcing their own internal verdict to anyone willing to shout louder. And while this continues, they lose something they don't even realize they are losing. Let me put you inside a room. Imagine you are sitting in a conference room, 12 people at the table, the CEO at the far end, and you are looking at a 38-year-old man named Marcus. Marcus isn't real. The case is. In that moment, a colleague, someone Marcus had helped for years, is publicly attributing a serious project failure to him. The accusation is false. Marcus has proof. He has emails. He has dates. He has witnesses. Everyone in the room is waiting for Marcus to react. And you, sitting there, are waiting too. You know what is supposed to come next in a normal script. The counterattack, the documents, the airtight defense. But Marcus opens his mouth and closes it. He looks at the colleague, he looks at the table, and he says nothing. The silence lasts 8 seconds. In a meeting room, 8 seconds is an eternity. You can feel the discomfort on your own skin just imagining it. The colleague tries again, louder this time. Marcus keeps looking, to you, Watching, it seems obvious. Marcus got caught. Marcus lost. Marcus folded without even trying. What you don't yet know is that those 8 seconds of silence were the result of 15 years of learning. To understand why that moment was different, you have to go back 15 years. For most of his adult life, Marcus had been the man who defended. He defended decisions at work against colleagues who questioned for the sake of questioning. He defended choices with his family against relatives who needed someone to criticize. He defended his character against anyone who doubted him in an argument, and he was proud of it. He thought it was integrity. Anyone who doesn't defend themselves is hiding something. That was the rule he had learned at home from a father who confused defense with dignity. But year after year, Marcus kept noticing something strange, something he tried to ignore because it contradicted everything he had been taught. The accusations never stopped. Every defense seemed to open the door for the next one. The people he convinced today came back tomorrow with another doubt. The ones who never bought it kept not buying it, with the same intensity 10 years later. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a spoon. And maybe you are listening to this and recognizing a Marcus inside yourself. Stay with me, because what he discovered next changes everything. Marcus also began to notice something even more uncomfortable. The people hardest to convince were not the smartest. They were the ones most invested in being right. And those people were not searching for truth. They were searching for an opponent. When he defended himself, he handed them the opponent they needed. By 35, he started noticing a physical pattern. Every time he defended himself, he lost something he could not put into words. Energy, sleep, something deeper. Like he was paying an invisible tax on every explanation. He would wake up in the middle of the night, replaying arguments he had already won rationally, but that kept living inside him, rewriting answers he had already given, arguing with people who weren't even in his life anymore. That was when he started reading Jung, not looking for a solution, looking for vocabulary to describe what he was already feeling, and he found a sentence that changed everything. Jung wrote, in essence, "You cannot integrate the shadow of another person who refuses to take responsibility for it." Marcus read it 3 times. He closed the book. He opened it again. He read it again, and he understood. And maybe you are about to understand too. Every time he defended himself, he had been agreeing to carry a shadow that wasn't his. When someone accused him of being cold, he justified himself. He was agreeing to carry the other person's discomfort with the coldness of their own life. When someone said he was arrogant, he explained himself. He was agreeing to carry the other person's discomfort with the competence they had not built. When someone called him distant, he moved closer. He was agreeing to carry the other person's loneliness as if it were his responsibility. Marcus had been, for 15 years, the psychological landfill of everyone who refused to look inside themselves, and paying for it with his own mental health. Before I show you what Marcus did in that meeting, hit subscribe. This channel was built for the men who recognize this pattern. Now, back to that meeting. Go back with Marcus to the conference table. You are still sitting in that room. The colleague is still talking. Marcus has Jung's sentence in his head as the colleague begins. For 30 seconds, he watches the accusation build, the voice rising, the colleague gaining confidence with every word Marcus does not say, and Marcus realizes, in real time, what is happening. You, watching, have not seen it yet, but he has. The colleague is not accusing him of a project failure. He is transferring. The colleague himself had been the one who failed to review a critical step 3 months earlier. And now, under pressure from the CEO, he needs a place where that failure can land. Marcus is the place. The defense Marcus has ready, the emails, the dates, the witnesses, will not change anything. Even if he proves with absolute precision that it wasn't him, the colleague will not back down. He will recalibrate the accusation. Well, but you should have noticed. Well, but you are the senior. Well, but you never warned anyone. The accusation will change shape, but the shadow will keep trying to land on him. So Marcus does not respond with words. He responds with silence. Not a passive silence, an observed silence. He looks at the colleague in a way that communicates one thing only. I heard you. I know what you are doing, and I am not going to take it. You, sitting in that room, feel the air shift. The meeting ends in a strange atmosphere. Everyone leaves uncomfortable. You leave uncomfortable. And here is the detail that matters. In the 3 weeks that follow, 5 different people from the company come to Marcus privately. Not to ask about the accusation, to apologize for his silence. We should have said something in that moment. I saw it wasn't fair, and I didn't have the courage to speak up. You were right not to lower yourself. One of those people is the CEO. Marcus never defended his version, never showed the emails, never called the witnesses, and his version won. More than that. 6 months later, it was the colleague who made the accusation who left the company. Not because of that meeting, because of a pattern other people started to see after that day. When Marcus refused to participate in the tribunal, the room started looking at the judge, and the judge could not stand being observed. And here is why this changes everything in your life. Most men spend their entire lives in a position nobody told them was a position. They get accused, they respond, they get provoked, they fight back. They get questioned, they justify. It looks normal, it looks mature, it looks like someone who takes their reputation seriously. But think about what that costs, added up over a lifetime. Every argument you have had in the last 10 years with someone who was never going to change their mind, how much of your mind did it consume? How many bad nights of sleep? How many mental conversations stuck on repeat, in the shower, in the car, in the grocery line? That is the invisible tax. And it is not paid in money, it is paid in something more expensive. Mental bandwidth. Every accusation you agree to carry is an open file in your head that never closes. You sleep with it open, you wake up with it open, you work with it open. The men who stop defending themselves do not do it to look strong. They do it because at some point they understood that their life has a finite number of mental files that can stay open at the same time. And they decided to stop spending those slots on people who were never going to close the file, no matter what they did. The bet here is not to win an argument. The bet is to take your mind back so you can use it on what actually matters. Now, you might be thinking, but what about when the accusation is serious? What about when staying silent gets read as guilt? What about when defending yourself is a matter of justice, not pride? That is the right question, and the answer is uncomfortable. Whoever is willing to listen to you will listen, even if you say very little. Whoever isn't, and this is what nobody wants to admit, will use everything you say as fuel, and the absence of what you don't say as fuel too. Think about Marcus. If he had brought the emails, the dates, the witnesses, he would have won technically, but he would have lost 5 things he only realized later. He would have given the colleague the chance to recalibrate the accusation in real time. He would have turned the room into a tribunal where he became the defendant by agreeing to show up. He would have validated the premise that the accusation deserved a public response in the place and, at the moment, the attacker chose. He would have spent political capital asking, how do I defend myself, instead of, why am I being accused? And he would have gone home that night, even after winning, carrying the argument in his head for weeks. You don't go silent to look innocent. You go silent because you understood that the other person's verdict was never what was at stake. What was at stake was your own mind, and it cannot be brought back with words. What happened to Marcus has a technical name in depth psychology. Jung called it the withdrawal of projection. When someone attacks you, they are, most of the time, attacking something they cannot tolerate in themselves. Frustration with their own career becomes an accusation against yours. Insecurity in their own relationship becomes criticism of yours. Envy becomes morality. Failure becomes denunciation. This mechanism is so universal that Jung described it as the invisible engine of almost every human conflict. Think about the last person who attacked you unfairly. Now think about what was happening in their life at that moment. Almost every time you will find it. And here is the critical point. When you defend yourself, you capture the projection. You agree to be the holder of what belonged to the other person. You begin to carry their shadow. And one thing Jung discovered, watching thousands of patients across 40 years of clinical practice, is that another person's shadow is heavier to carry than your own. Because your shadow you can integrate, theirs can only be returned. When you stay silent, not with anger, not with contempt, just silent, something extraordinary happens. The projection has nowhere to land. It returns to the sender, and the sender, for the first time, is forced to look at their own contents. This is what Jung meant when he wrote that nobody becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When a man refuses to carry another person's darkness, he forces them to do the most painful thing in the human psyche, to face themselves without a mirror. That is why these men are unbearable to people who are used to manipulation, not because they are aggressive, because they are impermeable. And now comes the part you need to understand if you want to stop paying that invisible tax for the rest of your life. When you don't defend yourself, three things start happening inside the head of the person who attacked you, and they have no psychological tool to handle any of the three. The first, they lose the reference point. An attack is a call that expects an answer. It is a feedback system. Without your return signal, the attacker's brain enters a loop. They cannot close the interaction. They cannot file it away. You have seen someone repeat the same accusation several times in different tones, hoping it will finally land. That is what is happening. Without your reaction, they are attacking the void. And the void does not give back. The second, they start hearing their own voice. When you respond, they only hear you. When you stay silent, they only hear themselves. And most accusations, said out loud without interruption, sound ridiculous even to the person who made them. The human brain can only hold an absurd narrative as long as someone is willing to push back against it. Without the opponent, the accusation deflates on its own. People who attack others depend on your defense, so they don't have to listen to what they are saying. The third, and this is the one that changes the game, your silence becomes their memory. You forget the accusation in 3 days. They will remember your silence for months. They will go back mentally to that scene. They will rewrite it. They will imagine what you were thinking. They will start to believe you knew something they didn't. They will start to believe you saw something in them they could not see themselves. And at some point, and this almost always happens, they will start to doubt themselves, not the accusation they made. Something much deeper, their own ability to judge. And when that breaks in someone, the relationship with you is never the same again. You did not win the argument. You won the entire war by refusing to participate in it. These men did not stop fighting, they changed the board. They understood that defending yourself is playing a game where the other person sets the rules chooses the tribunal, and decides when the case is closed. Refusing to play is not cowardice. It is the only move the other person never learned to counter. That is why, after crossing this line, these men rarely lose another battle. Not because they got stronger, because they are no longer on a field where defeat was possible. And this is the transition Jung spent his life trying to describe. The moment when a man stops fighting for external validation and starts living from his own center. It is not a dramatic moment. There is no ceremony. There is no witness. It is just a silence. On some ordinary day, in some ordinary room, facing some accusation that seemed important, and from that point on, he is a different man. And you? Think about the last time you defended yourself to someone who didn't deserve the explanation. How much of your mind did that conversation consume in the weeks that followed? And then think about someone who attacked you and waited for a response that never came. Where is that person now? How do they speak about you today? Drop the word silence in the comments if you recognize the pattern and you are ready to cross this line. If you are still in the defending phase, drop the word still. In the next video, I am going to show you the only situation where Carl Jung said defending yourself still made sense, and why understanding that exception is what separates silence from paralysis. That is the video you need to watch before you apply anything you heard today. See you there.